And Pākehās, and I speak generally in this country, are stupid. They're not only racist, they're stupid because they think that they can oppress us and that somehow they are going to be exempted from retaliation.
I know that what happened on Waitangi Day scared the shit out of Jim Bolger. I know it frightened a lot of the Pākehā MPs, and if it did nothing else than achieve that goal, then we achieved a lot.
Aotearoa is Māori land, and we never ever gave up that right to control and have authority over ourselves.
Time to waste, ready to blow, mass confusion, time to go to do with the future, children's situation, got the nation, misinformation, Māori people are disparate minority, race relations #1 priority, politics think they've got the solution, I ain't no freak of evolution, no mountain pot can make me the same, I just that common color people game, yo, she got the damn Māori crew, come on, ora.
Waters of Waitangi to weep.
If Waitangi was supposed to make us one people, today it's become a dividing line. It's become the focus of a fundamental dispute between some Māori and the Crown about who governs who in this country and how much self-control Māori should have over themselves. It became a target in the 1970s when young Māori heard their elders speak on the marae with bitterness over the loss of land and power over their own affairs. Syd Jackson was a rebel in the protest group Ngā Tamatoa.
We set ourselves up as an action group. We didn't want to be a talk group, although we did a hell of a lot of that. And we took that whakatauki, tamatu, tamaora, tamanoho, tamamate as our guide.
The members of this new movement challenged myths about this country's harmonious race relations, but they weren't the violent revolutionaries seen in other countries. Their threats were more symbolic than real.
We were inspired, of course, by all these amazing things that were happening in the world during that time. You know, we had the independence movements in Africa, we had the development of black power, the rise of the Nation of Islam in the United States, the birth of black pride. And young people, I think, universally, and we were all part of it, really believed that you could bring about revolutionary change, and that even more importantly, you could do it overnight.
The treaty became a symbol of Māori in New Zealand, an icon for the loss of language and culture. Ngā Tamatoa used Waitangi as a forum for grievances.
We decided that since the treaty is the focal point of our grievances, that we should go to Waitangi and that we should mourn by the waters. And we did. We went there and we had a passive, silent protest. We dressed in black, we wore greenery, and as the result of that protest, we were vilified by the politicians, which we expected. We were attacked by the racists, which we knew would happen. But we were also shat on and spat on by many of our people.
All this highlighted the state of the document itself. Questions were asked and the answers proved embarrassing.
They couldn't find it. And the government had bureaucrats running around like rats in a cage trying to find the treaty document. And in the end, they found it, I think, in a building in Auckland. And it had been attacked by rodents. The rats had gnawed at it to such an extent that the original document had almost been destroyed. And that underlined for us the status of the treaty at that time. And I believe it's still the status of the treaty in this time. except that the rats are attacking us instead of the document. You see, we have two choices. The first is that we can accept forever that the condition from which we suffer will always be upon us. And we just accept that the system that causes and brings that affliction upon us will always have the right to do so. Or we can fight to change it. We can either choose to live in servitude or we can change it.
20 years on, Jackson is a father and grandfather. He's still a fighter, but his tone shows resignation.
What more can they do to us than they have already done? In 50 years after the signing of the treaty, our population was less than 10% of what it had been in 1840. They had almost completed total genocide upon us, and our population is now, 155 years after the treaty, only what it was in 1840. So if they've almost wiped us out, if they have attempted to destroy us psychologically, if they have attempted to destroy our language, our culture, our heritage, our traditions, and our spirituality, what have we got to fear now? We can only improve our situation in our own country by fighting to liberate ourselves, and that's what we are doing. And the land occupations are really a very small and conservative action, but it's the beginning of the struggle to free ourselves from the racial oppression and exploitation from which we have suffered. And those actions will be nothing compared to what's going to happen in the future if the Pākehā population is unable to accept that positive change, recognition of our rights as tangata whenua must be acted upon. Because if they don't do it, then we will.
In 1984, Māori people staged a mass mobilisation to Waitangi. Old and young, conservative and radical joined together in Te Waitangi. Nothing like it had been seen since the land march of almost a decade earlier. It drew many Māori into debate about grievances. Hone Harawira sees the hikoi as a landmark.
A lot of the things that have developed since have been as a result of people participating in that hikoi. Our problem, again going back to those days, was that we were probably too democratic and we allowed the issues to develop without stepping in it and also driving the issues. And we said, oh no, ko te kaupapa te mea nui, so we'll let the issues evolve and we'll just fade back into the background. In those days, the aim of the group was simply to raise people's awareness to treaty issues. Our primary slogan in those days was the treaty is a fraud, which used to freak out a lot of Māori people. They go, no, it's not. So, well, why isn't it? And then they start having to think themselves. A lot of them didn't give much thought to it at all. So the things we did, the actions we took, the things we used to say, the way we used to say them, was very much a way of provoking Māori people into stepping outside their framework of understanding. When we say the treaty is a fraud, and I know it used to upset a lot of Māori people, it was our way of getting them to say, well, what do you mean by that? So we could explain those sorts of things, and they go, oh, okay, boy, because our tupuna didn't see it that way. So nowadays, when we're talking about the need for the treaty to be honoured, it's because the way our tupuna felt about the treaty, the way they saw it, the things that they expected to come from it, we expect those same things to come to pass in this day and age. Sure, it was signed 150 years ago, but could be 1,050 years ago as far as we're concerned. The treaty was signed, it's a binding contract, and as Maggie Thatcher would say, a contract is a contract is a contract.
Hone Harawira comes from a family renowned for their loud, confrontational defence of Māori rights. In the 80s, he was part of the Waitangi Action Committee. Today, he's raising a family and working among the Māori community in Northland. But like many Māori from the north, the treaty is still the contract that every year comes up for renewal. In 1995, the parties reached a standoff, and the protest movement was to renew controversy. It was the first time Māori protest flags had been raised over the treaty grounds. Protest that year was louder than ever because the Māori community had been dismissive of the government's fiscal envelope proposals. Events tested the government's tolerance and caused a change to treaty commemorations. This satisfied Hone Harawira.
To stop the celebrations has always been a focal point, and that's another thing that we were able to achieve last year as well. By taking down the colonial flags, the Governor-General had to back up and disappear. We were quite comfortable with that. Flying the flags, raising people's awareness, and forcing the Crown to look a little more seriously at the intentions of Māori in respect of land claims and Māori issues generally. I know that what happened on Waitangi Day scared the shit out of Jim Bolger. I know it frightened a lot of the Pākehā MPs, and if it did nothing else than achieve that goal, then we achieved a lot. And I know from Māori people who are involved with the National Party that after Waitangi Day, the National Party Pākehās were really worried when they realised, hey shit, what's going on? Our intention is to try to force Māori to look harder at themselves, because it's Māori people who have to change if the treaty is ever to be on it, not the Crown. We use the Crown as a way of focusing on the issues, but we know where the real change has to come, and it's not from the Crown. The Crown can continue to be the Crown as long as it likes, the way it is. But the day that Māori people collectively are of the one mind that they want treaty issues on it, the way they were written, is the day that things will change.
The way Ken Mair has spoken of change has proved more unpopular than any other activist in the movement. Frustration over delays to the Wanganui River claim and land claims led to an occupation at Motoa Gardens in 1995. The community was charged with anxiety, but the camp settled into almost normal routines of village life. While the occupation was supported by a cross-section of Wanganui Māori, it was Ken Mair who captured headlines. He says the environment is the motivation for his tough talk.
If people feel comfortable with desecrating our awa, polluting and shitting in our awa, our lands and our forests, well, from my point of view, that's utter nonsense. I think what they should be doing is analysing where we're coming from and saying, hey, this is just not good for Māori, but this is good for society as a whole. And I think if people begin to understand where some of us are coming from, they may feel a lot more comfortable.
Continued pollution of the Wanganui River was one of the underlying reasons that drove Wanganui people to claim the reserve at Motoa Gardens. But like many protest actions, it resulted in people talking past each other and seemed only to isolate the Māori group within the wider Wanganui community. But for Ken Mair, the ultimate objective was never obscured.
Pākehā Tori will be under the control of iwi, but it should be remembered that Pākehā Tori is part of a bigger picture in regard to the thievery, the deceit that was used to take 86,000 acres of our land in Wanganui.
Provocative action by protesters in the quiet streets of Wanganui were viewed as intimidation and increased public apprehension. For some protesters, the police presence had the same effect.
Because you don't blink and will intimidate us, in particular myself. Don't worry, we're watching you.
And normally quiet streets became the front lines of protest actions.
We do want to control our daily lives. We do want to control everything that is within our tribal boundaries, whether that's the air, the land, the river, our thinking, whatever. And I say control in the context of us being the guardians.
Mair believes the media simplifies events and concentrates on him too much. He wants to focus on the bigger picture.
I think the important thing that people need to understand is that it's just not about Ken Mair, it's just not about individuals, it's about a kaupapa that I think our tupuna left for us to carry on. And that kaupapa is much more important than any individual, I would suggest.
Whākai Tore was the focus for another gathering a year later. Those who came to commemorate the occupation showed a festive spirit at first, but a temporary truce between Māori and police was soon abandoned when a group set up a tent at another reserve in Wanganui. Protests in New Zealand don't reach the extreme levels often seen overseas, but skirmishes occur when police and protesters square off.
I am a very strong advocate of saying us as a people are the only ones that can decide our own needs, and that should never ever depend on Pākehā people, Pākehā systems.
Māori nationalists like Annette Sykes speak of the tangata whenua's responsibility to protect this land. They argue it's up to Māori to care for the land, and she's direct about what she wants.
It's absolute authority vesting in us as the First Nation peoples to care for, to be the kaitiaki for this land, and to work out ways and means in which how that can be achieved. Very simple concept. For me, when it's debated with any group of individuals, very rarely is it disagreed with. The reality, though, it's about sharing power, or at least recognising that in determining priorities on how power is to be used, Māori have a say, because we are close to those intrinsic values of this part of the planet which will determine those priorities. And my concern is that the governments of this country, the entrepreneurs of this country, the private developers of this country won't give that substance in their lives. And that's the problem. That sets us on a course of conflict, because they immediately make our view the other view, or the invisible view. And they then set into place perspectives that they say are New Zealand perspectives, but in true sense are actually international perspectives of exploitation, corporatisation, capitalism, all of those values which may of themselves not be linked in any way to the Māori worldview.
The newer activists have broadened their protest to include the international economic community. While some Māori welcome investment, the protest movement see groups like the Asian Development Bank as a threat to Māori values.
Our challenge to those institutions is that if they continue with that type of framework without due regard to the cultural imperatives that we live by, then they will have their forests burned down, they will have their hydro dams destroyed.
They want to discourage multinationals from buying up New Zealand assets and question the price that must be paid for economic development.
We've all been brought up, go and get an education, go and get a good job, make lots of money, go and work for Fletcher Challenge, go and work for, that's the kind of worldview that our parents have encouraged upon us. But I think we need to be much more critical in whether or not that is really a path of happiness, that is a path of giving us true well-being. Because for me, the first step in understanding how we implement Tino Rangatiratanga is a personal commitment. So for me, it's understanding, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a kaitiaki in this part of the planet? Does it mean that I can continue to use as kind of a lifestyle which is the throwaway plastic lifestyle, go and have McDonald's all the time, use lots of petrol, without impacting on the environment? Is that the right kind of lifestyle for me? Is it right to allow our reo to die? Is it right to have television without our world being portrayed as our world, not a flash world, but just our world, an important, loving kind of view? But in the last 150 years, with the prospects of industrialisation, we've been corrupted by another view of exploitation, which is sourced for me in greed, in values of personal gain as opposed to collective gain, and those kind of values are juxtaposed against ours, and there's going to be some tensions in getting that change. I also think, though, that there is another school of hard knocks out there. We are 1 in 4 in the poverty stakes in this country, Māori, and pain of itself, living in communities where you are being knocked around all of the time, is an education of itself, which, in my view, births people who are so committed to developing change, because that environment is so horrible for them, that you're also going to have Māori nationalists come from the policies of privatisation that have ghettoised Māori people and continue to deprive us of development opportunities that all citizens should have.
It's the fiercest face of Māori protest. Tamiiti's gesture of disgust at Waitangi in 1995 remains in the memories of New Zealanders. He wasn't the one who spat in the Governor-General's face, but he's been identified unfairly with the incident. As a child, he learned about the confiscation of Tūhoe land, and he's inherited his father's ideals.
Haere mātou, no ai kui mātou te pito tonu o te ki mōhio nei tātou te raina raupatu ki tai. I nā rā tapu ka hae mātou rei ki te piatuna. I tētai rā tapu anō ka hae māu ko toko taina a ki. Ka haere māu ki rei tahi tō māu matua. No hoi no tāna whakanahana ka kōrero mai te koroua. Te churua tukorua, arai te huarahi, I mua I a tātou ne. Ko tēnā te whenua o Tūhoe, o korau ne. Ko ina te whenua o korau kuia I whānako hia.
Tame has served residents of the town of Tānautua with notices of eviction, informing them they're living on land confiscated from Tūhoe and asking them to leave. The notices aren't supported by law, but they underline Tame's attitude to the land.
Nā kōtou whānako, nā whenua Tūhoe whānako hia, whakawātea kōtou nei tēnei huara. Ko hatine mātou he tahi wāhana te kau mārua marama, ke wātea kōtou I tēnei whenua no mātou.
Reaction to the eviction notices is still unclear, but Tame continues to stress the issues and promote Tūhoe as an independent nation in Aotearoa.
Ke mōhi ai rātau nā, kare mātai te Harawira ki konei no hona ka whiu kōre, kai te haere mātai I muatonu I a rāta. I muatonu I a rāta, kanohi ki te kanohi. Ki reira, ki te tohu ki a rātau, te kōrero ki a rātau, ki te hoatu kōrero ki a nai Tūhoe, ki te huna kai wahotoa nai Tūhoe. I tēnei wā, e mahana tāna tako puta mai ki reira, hano ki te whakaputai o rātai whakaaro. Ko tētai tonu I kōrero atura, I mua atura, ko te kaupapa mō te pānui puta atura, te huna whakawā te iru nei nā whenua whānau. Ko tērā tā mātou, tō mātou whare, mo te huna he te Harawira ki te he he tahi kaupapa, he ana rātai ki te mō.
As in Tūhoe, the confiscation of lands in the Waikato can be felt as bitterly today as it was last century. This deep sense of anger and loss has shaped the protest career of Eva Rickard.
My mum was the daughter of the survivor from Rangiriri. If this little boy did not escape from Rangiriri with his little sister when he was 14, I would not be here. He was my mum's dad. And when Cameron asked for the gates to be opened, they opened the gates and he shot my great-grandmother. And my grandfather picked up his little sister and ran to the river and swam the river, came to Raglan. He grew up, had my mother, an only child, and that's why I'm here.
The history lesson was taken up by Eva late in life, but she quickly went to the forefront of the protest actions. A veteran of the movement, she still has the fire of a young radical.
I make no bones about it. I am a fighter. I am not a protester. I'm a fighter for the cause of my people's freedom. When I actually began to fight this land, I looked for the record of all the cases, and I found that my mother was 50 when she was sitting on the steps of Parliament waiting for Mr. Fraser to ask him, when are you going to return our land? And I was 50 when I started the struggle for the return of our land. So I guess my future and my destiny is woven into her life. The fight that she did not finish, I am finishing it.
Eva's personal mission was to fight for the return of the Raglan golf course in the late 70s. It began as a lonely struggle, but in time supporters from other protest groups took up her cause.
Keep your hands off Maori land and give it back. What do you think you're up to? Give back that land. You've got your fingers in all the pies, all you bringers.
Like many in the protest movement, Eva found herself battling her own people as well as the Crown. They showed no sympathy when her actions led to her arrest by the police.
But the saddest part for me was, my people were all drunk at the golf club house and was clapping. When I got arrested, they were out there clapping. And I thought I should have been really angry. But I understood their apathy and their thinking. And I thought to myself, one day you will understand. So when I finally got the land back, they couldn't talk to me, right? And I picked up their children. And I started a work scheme down here. And the children says, Auntie, I was only 5 when you got arrested, tell me about it. So these 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds I had to tell the story to. But it was worth it. All that abuse and all that criticism paid off.
The recent Waikato settlement was not a time of rejoicing for Eva. It's directed her struggle even more against her own people. She believes the $170 million deal struck with the Crown to compensate the loss of more than 1 million acres of land is a sellout, and she's prepared to fight it to the end.
I have to win this war. When they're saying they give us 35,000 acres, they're giving us 9 police stations, universities, research stations. Do we take all those buildings out and use the land? We can't use that land. And $170 million, what for? Our people were never like that. They called it blood money. I would rather they let us have 0.5% of the rates of 1.2 million acres.
Eva's search for justice often ended in court, but her experience wasn't encouraging.
And I have had more success with positive Māori action than going to a court where one judge sits up there and says, Mrs. Rickard, don't you think the courts is where you're going to find justice? I said, Your Honour, I would like to believe that, but my experience tells me otherwise. I believe that until the Māori people are free, until they become a sovereign nation, they are already promised a sovereign nation, they are sovereign. And of course, this is the word that the parliamentarians don't like, sovereignty. They're going to get it, and we are going to get our sovereignty. We are going to take it.
Bastian Point. It woke up New Zealand to recognise the importance of land issues to Māori. The inevitable confrontation with the army and police shocked the nation. The protest movement was now focusing on specific grievances, and Ngāti Whātua ki Ōrākei pulled in many supporters for their long occupation. The protesters were ousted after 506 days of occupation, but it would be many years before the tribe got a settlement.
I again warn you that you are all willful trespassers, and a failure to leave at this time will render you liable to arrest for the offence of willful trespass.
People get for being bloody passive for over 100 bloody years. That's the way we get bloody treated.
Joe Hawke was driven by an ancient affinity with the land. He remembers his grandmother.
I remember that 50 odd years ago, her sitting me in the garden between the kumara and the riwai and sitting me down and asking me to put my hands forward. And she produced in one hand 3 pennies, and in the other hand she put a lump of dirt out of the garden. And she asked me obediently, which one will last the longest? And of course, here I was, a lad of 4 going on 5 years of age, sitting under the shadow of my fire, knowing full well that this was a tricky question and I had to have the right answer. And I looked at the pennies, which I knew in my mind represented a whole lot of lollies and ice creams and treats that I could procure with it. And then it dawned on me what my nanny was saying. And immediately I just put the pennies down in the garden and I held out the hand with the dirt. And I said, Nanny, this will last the longest. And it's a prophecy that's come real to me in my life.
The Māori Land March of 1975 was a turning point for many Māori. Its leader Whina Kupa, the oldest of the new radicals, captured the imagination of many, including Joe.
After the Māori Land March, I'd already explained to my children that a great wrong had been done at Hawke. And what the Land March actually developed was, in my own self, was when you do have an initiative in front of you, if you don't grasp at it and organise it, then it's going to dissipate, it's going to disappear. So I said virtually to my children, I said, will you come and help your tupunas regain their turanga waiwai? And we are just the machinery for that to happen, for that to develop. And in unison, they all said, what are we waiting for?
Tragedy struck after protesters occupied the land.
I ask all you, please, here today, to move aside. I must go and have a karakia with our baby Joannie. You must not stop us. Please, Overton, let me pass.
The death of Joe's niece, 5-year-old Joanna, in a fire at the camp added a new sense of loss to their struggle.
The death of Joannie was a real tragedy for us as a rōpū. For us as a whānau, Joannie was 5.5 years of age when she was tragically killed here on the campaign. And that was a big emotional and spiritual blow to our campaign. Joannie being the first Māori in modern times to have died in defence of her land, the land of her tupunas. And so it was a shedding of a lot of emotions. Whether the campaign actually stopped there was discussed vigorously. And after a period of mourning and after a period of hui with each family and with the hapu, it was decided that the campaign had to carry on to at least make some sense of the sacrifice Joannie made.
Today, Ngāti Whātua hold assets worth $100 million, which has meant a shift in focus from protester to businessman for Joe Hawke. He's moved out of the grievance mode.
We can seize the future, know the ramifications that are held within the future, and lead to those goal reaches. What Ngāti Whātua has in spiritual assets supersedes those things which you can put a number on evaluation. What Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei has here is their tūranga waiwai, their right to stand, their right to have their children stand and breathe and sing and dance and kōrero and play. It's something that Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei has never had. It was a struggle to regain the dignity of being tangata whenua of the Tāmaki Makaurau area. And that to me is huge value for us as a people, for us as Māori, to finally have the Crown apologise to Ōrākei and to say that an injustice was served on your people so many years ago.
The settlement of the Bastian Point claim and the opportunities for tribal development that followed has turned a confrontation in the past into something more positive in the present, and brighter possibilities for a new generation of New Zealanders. While land is still at the heart of the Māori struggle, the protest movement is more likely these days to talk about sovereignty and Māori nationhood. While direct action still rests with the few, Māori from all walks of life now demand a greater say in their destiny, and the protesters won't let up.
Māori people need to get off their big fat asses and start looking in the mirror and saying, when the hell are we going to get together and start saying we are not the enemy of one another? It's the Crown, it's big business.
There are going to be barriers put in the way, and sometimes we're actually going to have to bowl those barriers over in any way whatsoever. And sometimes that is going to be more than a little bit of direct action. It may mean some actual, and it's sad to say in one way, but actually physically standing up for our rights and fighting for what we believe in.